I'm going to invite you to, so somebody wants to ask the first question? Okay.
Something I would like to ask on behalf of the audience, which is that obviously some of us have been at this for a while now, so we're well versed with terms. I would want to know, are there things that have come up tonight that people just went right over their heads, that they'd like explained? Or is everybody quite happy that they know everything is being talked about?
Okay, that's a good question. I'm just wondering if somebody else could maybe move the mic around so that because I'm having trouble seeing people and sort of talking at the same time, so I don't know if... Do you want to do that there? Right, yeah. Pass it around so that I can...
It's quite long. Yeah. So was there anyone who didn't understand any of the terms that were used tonight? I wondered if everyone used that cotton ceiling, I thought might be a bit of a mystery.
Yes, cotton ceiling.
Cotton ceiling. Thank you, Lisa. So,
I did slightly explain, but I was being hurried on. The idea of the cotton ceiling is like the old thing of the glass ceiling, which was meant to mean that that there was a glass ceiling that prevented women in businesses and in the professions from progressing to the highest levels. And it looked all okay, it was just a glass ceiling, but no woman could ever get through it. The idea of the cotton ceiling, I have to say this is just so revolting, it makes me really... but that women lesbians are unwilling to allow trans women who think they're lesbians into their knickers. That's the cotton ceiling. But it is, I mean, this is the sort of thing, you know, this is what actually, I mean, they've had conferences on the cotton ceiling, give me strength.
yes. Another question? Another question? Oh, somebody's right. Okay.
Take the mic.
Trans activists keep saying that the Equality Act won't change and we can still use single-sex exemptions. In reality, trans activists lobby businesses to ignore single-sex exemptions, etc. For example, the Oxford students tweeting Primark after a trans friend was challenged at the changing rooms. How do we fight this? How do we lobby for those exemptions to be used?
Well, I probably didn't cover it very well because I wrote too much. Didn't tell you everything I wanted to. But I think my interpretation of policies and law is that people are thinking of the Gender Recognition Act and self-ID separate from the Equalities Act. So this might change, the GRA, but it won't affect the Equalities Act because there are these protections and these are protected characteristics and they're endorsed, enshrined in law. So women can have single-sex spaces. But what will those women look like? Who will those women be? So if somebody, a man, is saying, I am a woman, you have to accept that. I can now have a birth certificate, all these things, with no money exchanged, because it was so expensive before and arduous, that now I am a woman, surely I am entitled to that protection, those single-sex spaces, because I am that sex. How are we going to challenge that when it's enshrined, endorsed by law, when it's already happening now and the changes, officials' changes, have not happened? So whilst I was trying to say that on the Women's Place UK, there was a lot of advice there how to challenge a union. If they endorse and they advocate and they support you being a trade unionist, and so do I. But the trade unions have really let us down on this one. They let us down. It's all become supremely woke and we're not questioning it, we're just going along with it. And so, therefore, we should all support that. The FBU tried to challenge them. Oh no, we're all going to go along with it, it's fine. They don't even know what they're talking about. And it's all propelled by the LGBT groups and a woman lesbian I was very friendly with, who in private told me she had concerns about this, in public called me vile for challenging it. So I think that it's conflating, new word, we've got so many words, we should have a little board that all these words that have come up and been used to try and explain what's going on, because in a way, it's just, none of it really makes sense. So you've got the Gender Recognition Act and you've got the Equalities Act, and they are going to conflict, really. So we said we've got this protection, but who is that protection really going to apply to? So will it become null and void? Will those protected characteristics not even really exist?
Can I just add to that?
You may.
I was going to add to it too, but I'll see what you have to say.
Okay, so just to add to that, another thing you've got to understand is that the exemption in law for people like me is gender reassignment. So this means that, you know, I went through this arduous process of real life experience, psych evaluations, consistently, constant therapy, plus diagnosis, ruling out everything else, and then surgery, you know, that gender reassignment. But now, it's not everyone is actually able to get surgery. A lot of the time that's down to other medical conditions like blood clotting disorders and stuff. But the aim is to replace that protected characteristic of gender reassignment with gender identity, which is an entirely different thing. This is because essentially what it does is it turns everything I went through. So I'm just going to borrow this a second. And so any man can walk in and say, you know, I want to be a woman, and they go, okay, sign there. Sign that. Okay, congratulations, you're a woman. And that's what they're trying to reduce it to. And this is where there's no oversight, there's no gatekeeping. So while the protected characteristic is still gender reassignment, and obviously sex, the important one. When you talk about being able to challenge it, it is still a protected characteristic in the law. You have every right to challenge it. Do so. Just be bold, be brave, get rid in their face. Well, what the fuck are you talking about? It's the law. You can't do that. And it's going to be individual action that's going to push back, because ultimately it's these corporations have bought this shit, and so yeah, it's going to be individual action in a lot of part, I'm afraid.
Yes, just very briefly. One of the problems also is that most organisations do not know how to use the exemptions in the Equality Act. It's been kept very quiet, and if you ever even hint at it, you will usually get a blast from trans activists about how dreadful all of this is. A really classic piece of this is girl guiding, which now not only says that trans girls, i.e. boys who they or their parents have decided that their girls can join the guides and brownies, but they don't have to declare anything to parents if they're going away on residentials and sharing dormitories and so on and so forth. They could absolutely straightforwardly, there are several things in the Equality Act that they could have used. They say, legally we can't, and therefore this is what we're doing. So one of the things that I think, given that the government has said that they do not plan to change the Equality Act, the thing that actually needs to happen, particularly if self-ID goes through, but regardless of that, is that we find a way to really publicise how to do things with the Equality Act, so that single-sex places and all sorts of things can continue.
I would just like to maybe add something here. I've probably told the story before, but one of the things that concerns me is that this is happening preemptively. So you have different organisations who are actually starting to implement policies because they think, oh, it's going to happen anyway. Last year, I went to my local pool to a women-only swimming session in Northumberland, where I've been going for a long time, to be told when I arrived that this was the last one, because from the following week they were scrapping it. And in Northumberland, that actually involved not just the pool that I attend, but actually 9 other pools under one umbrella in Northumberland. So overnight, with no consultation, they just scrapped it. And when I asked why, nobody knew. So then I phoned the council to ask them, and they weren't sure either, and I was obviously passed around various departments. But when I pointed out that actually there may have been some reasons for having women-only swimming sessions, so that could have been around safety, but it could also have been around religious and cultural reasons, and body image. A couple of the women who went to the women-only sessions said that as they were older women, they just felt that they were slower, and that actually being made to swim in a mixed session would just stop them going. And I think some of those women, the very groups that we need to reach out to who would have benefited from that swimming session, were going to be denied it with no consultation. I brought that up at a Reclaim the Night Q&A afterwards later on that year, and there was three trade union members on the sort of panel, and nobody even wanted to answer my question about it. And I think that that's really shocking. And that you know, again, the sort of the very people that we thought that actually spoke up for women were silent. So that was my experience. Anyway, so any other questions, please? Yep, right at the back. Sorry.
Yep.
Yep.
I was just wondering, you know, like the way, Seven's been silenced from Twitter, other people have been blocked from Facebook and such like that, and obviously trying to shut down the places where this information can spread. I was just wondering, how many people here were picked trans by Mumsnet? How many by Facebook? How many by Twitter? How effective have they been, the people here?
Okay.
Because I was Mumsnet.
Did everybody hear that?
No.
I'll just sort of, she was sort of asking how many people have actually come to been critical of this because they have been actually on Mumsnet or Twitter or Facebook. Sorry, was there anything else that you mentioned?
Or anything else that they...
Any, basically social media, yeah.
Definitely.
So do you are you able to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, as some of you might have seen, I'm actually a friend of Seven Hags. I've also got an older sister who's transsexual, undergone the gender reassignment surgery, the whole thing. Never ever had a problem with anybody who's transsexual. I've known some lovely people.
Are you comfortable with the mic, just if you are?
I've met and known some really nice transsexual people in my years, but the way they behave on social media, it's just appalling. When you say to somebody, but you're not a woman, and all you get back is foul-mouthed abuse, and you're blocked from Twitter. I've been suspended from Twitter 3 times now, for fairly lengthy periods, twice for being gender critical, and the last one for standing up against paedophiles, because they've all now made their way onto Twitter, because everywhere else is banning porn. Now if you tell them they're being ageist, apparently you get blocked for telling somebody they're being ageist, but they don't get blocked for being ageist. Twitter has piqued me about so many things.
Thank you very much. Social media experiences. I wish I knew.
Do you remember why you were banned, do you?
No, I have no idea why I was banned. I was banned back on the 4th of November, and I found out first thing in the morning. Check my phone, and I got a Facebook DM. Are you suspended from Twitter? No, I don't know. Am I? You know, and I go on, and yeah, sure enough, you're kind of suspended. Okay, why? And there was nothing there. You know, people tell, you know, people say, you know, they get that message. Please delete this message. You know, please delete this message. This one's, you know, contravenes our terms of service or whatever. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. 5 appeals later, I'm still unsuccessful and none the wiser. So yeah, Twitter did me in pretty big style. And I'm not alone. Yeah, Miranda Yardley is now off Twitter altogether as well.
Does everybody know who Miranda Yardley is? She's another transsexual woman.
Yeah, and this is
being gender critical.
Yeah, this is coming from the transsexual. It's a transsexual. We're getting fucked in all this as well. You know, it's not just the gender critical women because they're getting silenced in their swathes, but we're getting copped out as well because they don't like us, like, you know, poking holes in our story. You know, wait a minute here, which.
I think
Miranda was actually banned from Twitter. I think Miranda was actually banned from Twitter for stating that he was male.
Amy Chandler is a man.
Or was it? Maybe it was something else. But Miranda has certainly been banned from something for saying.
Stock was suspended last week for calling Miranda a man.
Yeah, somebody was.
And she calls herself a man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And uses male pronouns.
Yeah.
But he, gets told off for using biologically correct pronouns for himself.
You can only self-identify in certain ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Evangelos, if you had anything to say, given that your experiences on Twitter.
I haven't been banned or suspended from Twitter or Facebook yet. But
Anytime now,
yeah, sure. But it's the case that Facebook has over 2 billion people, and Twitter has, I think, 700 million to 2 billion. I'm not exactly sure. But these social media need to understand the duty that they have to society. They are, if they were countries, they would be amongst the 3 biggest countries in the world, and it's important to realize the opportunity that's given to us through the internet to form one massive society in which we'll communicate with each other. And if we were ourselves to create those communities, we would have a duty to help in facilitating dialogue between people. And the fact that these companies act as governments who get to define what hate speech is, what are the limits of free speech, what are the limits of political correctness, which views are allowed to be banned from their platforms. And it's not an argument to say that they are their own platform, so they get to decide what is going to be said in their platforms or not. They have a duty. They have a duty to society to help in facilitating and letting people communicating with each other. So it's pretty dangerous that there are companies that get to decide what hate speech is, and it's of course also dangerous in the respect of governments. No person can define what hate speech is, but this is particularly damaging to dialogue and mutual understanding when it happens by individual companies, and not even companies, a few people who lead the companies.
Thank you. So there was somebody at the back. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
There were 2 things. One of them was the issue you've just been talking about. I haven't been banned yet, but I'm surprised. And I've set up a separate account with another platform called MeWe, where I've made contact with Jen Smith, who's one of the transgender people who was banned for saying he's male and he is male. But one of the concerns I have, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere with saying to Twitter, Facebook or whatever, you've got a duty to us, because they don't care. They've been called to Parliament, they've been called to the US to make their case. But I do think that we could maybe try going to our governments, because they use those platforms to communicate with us. They use those platforms to govern. They give us information, they ask for feedback. They're totally reliant. I mean, people don't use email so much anymore. And if you think the amount of information and also the way that they not control in a bad way, but inform us and engage with citizens, they can't use those platforms if more and more women, particularly, end up getting thrown off. they're not able to discharge their duty and they're not able to govern properly. So I think we were talking about dissidence and stuff earlier, and I feel that that's a really key thing, that we need to actually go to our governments and say, these platforms are not working for you, you're not effectively governing. And I'm not suggesting that they set up their own platforms, but that might be the only way for them to take it seriously, because it's interfering with the way that governments are operating. The other thing I wanted to ask was, possibly more to Seven than anybody else, is there actually any need now to have a Gender Recognition Act and gender recognition certificates? Because there were only 2 legal reasons that they were brought in, as from what I understand. And one of them was to do with the human rights aspect of people of the same sex to be able to marry. That's dealt with now. You don't need a gender recognition certificate in order to marry someone of the same sex. And the other one I can never remember, that there was a second legal issue. But I mean, Miranda Yardley has argued quite strongly that, you just scrap the lot. And personally, I think that might be, if it's possible legally, that might be a better way to do it, because the way things are rolling in from what's happening in Canada in particular and the USA, we're fighting this absolute avalanche of stuff to do with the Gender Recognition Act. It's all built into that, and it's so difficult to challenge it. But do we really even need it? I'm tempted to say what we should be going for is repeal the Gender Recognition Act and abolish gender recognition certificates.
Seven Hex, do you want to respond to that? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so firstly, I actually don't have a gender recognition certificate. I was going to get one, but it's like 140 quid. And I always found myself with better things to spend 140 quid on. And the other thing is that nobody really asked me for it. And then the one person that ever did ask me for it, which they're actually technically not allowed to do anyway, as soon as I said no, it was like, for some reason it just didn't have any real significance. And the longer I left it, the more I thought, what the fuck do I actually need this thing for anyway? That's not to say there isn't another use. So the other use was to do with privacy and non-disclosure. So, for example, I know of one transsexual who is applying for a bus pass. So hit retirement age, get a free bus pass. And of course, she will need to provide a birth certificate. And of course, if you provide the original birth certificate, ultimately the person reading that's going to go, I'm transsexual. It's automatically going to disclose that individual for what they are. And does this person technically have, does this person have to know of somebody's for a bus pass?
Can I ask, what problem does that create? Because if any of us go and get a bus pass, it declares that I'm a woman. What's the problem with people knowing I'm a woman? I forgot to say, I'm also tempted that what we should do away is make it mandatory that you have dead naming, because I'm really concerned about the issues to do with people being able to hide their previous identities. You can use a deed poll to change your name.
Mm-hmm. So why would you encourage dead naming?
What is dead naming?
Well, no, I wouldn't.
Okay, so dead naming is essentially to use an individual's previous name.
At the moment, if I changed my name by deed poll, and someone then 2 or 3 years later said that that's who she is, I wouldn't be able to go to them and say, you're dead naming me.
Right, okay, I see what you
mean. I don't understand why there's a different standard, because the reason that...
Yeah, I take the point. I don't know why there's a different standard, strictly speaking. It's lost on me too. It's not nice, but hey, what is? I mean, anyone can change their name.
Yeah.
If you change your name to Susan, but then people insisted in calling you Margaret, or, it's, they'll get to the point, well, I've changed my name, my name's Susan. Well, I don't care. I'm going to call you Margaret. It's, you can't stop it, but it's unpleasant, and certainly there shouldn't be any sort of laws sort of revolving around it, but everybody's entitled to change their name, not just for the purposes of sex reassignment.
When I've changed my name partly, but I didn't get a deed poll. All you need to do to change your name is change your name.
True. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just as simple as that. That's why I'm really unsure about the necessity for all of this, like, oh, dead naming. Because particularly with the issue of trans women and men who have criminal past.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the thing about that is, as I understood it, was when you got your gender recognition certificate, it was about privacy. You know, who has the right to know about your history? Right? And does average Joe in the street? Probably not. You know, employers, yeah. But then the thing about employers was that if ever they were to do a background check and stuff, you'd actually submit two. So two background checks would be submitted. One on the sort of name you've selected, and one on sort of your previous name. I've never been arrested. I can't tell a lie, I was once. It's a night in the cells, but here we go. So I've never really ran into this situation to say, you know, how media is. Some people, I don't give a shit. You know, some people do. Some people take their privacy very seriously.
Conscious that we're running short of time. I know somebody was wanting to ask a question. So,
I was just wondering.
Yeah.
As the BBC and the Guardian and most media outlets are very, they make women feel ashamed for saying anything about any of this. And until that stops, I really can't see how anything will change, because most women don't even know what's happening. Most men don't know what's happening. And the ones that do daren't speak, because you've got Lorraine Kelly on a morning saying how wonderful mermaids are, and you've got the BBC giving one-sided stories, the Guardian giving one-sided story. Until the media change, how can anything?
I'll just, in case anybody didn't hear that, you're just basically saying that particularly like so the BBC, the Guardian, sort of like respected media.
Lorraine Kelly on a morning.
Yeah, Lorraine Kelly of a morning. But respected media outlets are basically have been promoting this, and
they believe it because they haven't investigated what's really happening.
Yeah.
They just want to seem as if they're nice people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Which most of us do.
Okay. Thank you, George.
So, as far as the BBC goes, I don't think it's that innocent that they've not investigated it. It's quite sinister. They have a hugely overrepresented proportion of staff. I think it's 4% compared to 0.5% of it being the national average. So it's quite deliberate and sinister. There's that 4% under the trans umbrella, the lovely umbrella, at the BBC. I don't think there's anything just as innocent as failing to investigate at the BBC. I just wanted to make that point.
I agree.
But, you know, The Guardian has changed. Things changed slightly. Now, they're being a bit rubbish about it. Admittedly, they're being very, very slow, and it's one step forward, two steps back. But over the last 2 years, we have had key things like Hadley Freeman suddenly being able to speak more in The Guardian, and that one editorial that they did, The Guardian View, on the GRA consultation, which was just too late, frankly, possibly deliberately too late. But I think that the fact is that they have sensed that they were on the wrong side, the losing side possibly, and they decided, oh, hang on, we need to start being a little bit more...
Didn't they have something in about Martina and Avril?
Yeah, I know they got that absolutely wrong. I'm just, they are, like I say, one step forward, two steps back. But I do think that they have got to the point in The Guardian where, and in some of these places, where they are now acknowledging that they could be in trouble if they carry on being so completely one-sided. That editorial was a little bit too ambiguous for my liking.
Because, sorry, people, I think when they read things in the media, they view it as one voice rather than
different voices.
Yeah.
So that's
And you've definitely got places like The Guardian. For a long time you only heard from the likes of Owen Jones and is it Paris Lees? And surely I'm thinking people like Hadley were desperate to get the stuff published, but they just weren't getting published. It's been a small change, but I think that change is happening, and the fact that that change is happening is because people on the ground are leading it, and overwhelmingly it's becoming apparent that public opinion is on our side. The sport issue this week has really shown that. The massive amounts of support for Martina and all the other sports people who've come out on Martina's side. Again, the BBC and The Guardian completely misrepresented that, but they can't. The more people speak up, the more it becomes overwhelmingly apparent that it's common sense, and the vast majority of the public see that. And the vast majority of the public don't want to be told that they have to lie, that they have to profess faith in something that they don't have any belief in.
I think.
Is anybody else who's got a question? Because I've got another 10 minutes, so if I know who else wants a question, I'll try and get you all in. So one there, anyone else? Two? Right, okay.
I wasn't wanting to make a question actually, I was contributing to that discussion about the media, because I don't know whether anybody else heard it, but Women's Hour before Christmas in December, and then subsequently in January, I think they've had about 6 programmes. One programme, 2 programmes a week for 6 weeks, something like that, in which it was Jane Garvey, and she had a trans activist and a feminist putting different points of view. And interestingly, I didn't hear them all, but in most of the programmes I heard, the trans activist refused to come on the programme live, and so she was being recorded. So it was just quite interesting now, and Jane Garvey clearly was trying to be kind of really even-handed about this. But I think that you just had to hear some of that, and you come to your own conclusions really. And interesting, the last programme I heard was with the editor of Diva magazine, who was basically saying that she'd never had any complaints, because the other person was Julie Birchall, and Julie Birchall was saying that actually Diva has a very trans... Julie Bindle, yeah. Diva was quite supportive of trans activists, and the woman from Diva was saying, oh no, I've never had any complaints. But I understand afterwards there was a whole Twitter storm about this, saying that loads of women had actually complained to Diva about this. Anyway, all I'm saying is that it's worth actually having. If you didn't hear them, you probably. I'm not working in the morning, so unfortunate. But they're probably worth listening to actually, because it was a really good discussion.
Just one quick point about the media. You're right. Just talking about how the difference between how it is portrayed in the media. I know Meg touched on Caitlyn Jenner, won Woman of the Year, and Philip Bunce, who's also known as Philip Pippa Bunce. So 3 days a week or 2 days a week he's Philip Bunce, and a couple of days a week he's Pippa Bunce, and was named as one of the top 100 female executives. He works for Credit Suisse. They're always portrayed for their achievements, and I can honestly say the only time I have seen a trans man in the newspaper is for what? Being pregnant or giving birth. Men aren't having these public meetings because trans men are trying to take over or take spaces. The difference is, well, it's plus ça change. There's nothing changed. It's just yes. So it was just. Sorry.
The difference between sex and gender is absolutely key here, and that's one of the things that people are very confused about. So when you sort of say there's all this going on, people's eyes go blank. I think that's the first place I usually start to be clear with people. Well, there's this thing called sex. You're either female or you're male. and there's gender, which is whatever you say it means. And what I noticed on Northumberland County Council's website is on their equality policy, where it should say sex, it says gender all the way through. So I've written to them and asked them to change it, and they've said they will. So that's another idea for activism. That you just throw your public laws and point out the Equality Act is about sex, and they are not to substitute it with gender. That's an illegally incorrect thing to do.
Sorry, just before you do it, I just want a quick word on gender. First time I've ever heard it, about 11 years old. And it's like, sorry, what? Gender? And then you get told, yeah, it's like sex. And we do it as like sex. Well, it's like sex. Well, why don't you just use sex? And gender is one of these terms, like 11, 12-year-old, never really fully understood. It means nothing, anyway.
You'll have to bear with me because I'm kind of quite new to these ideas, but I want to just raise something about children and how we respond to when they raise stuff. It's been accepted as kind of good practice that you don't, if girls are kind of into pink, 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 that you actually kind of thwart that a bit, and likewise that in general terms you kind of let children be children and let them explore various kind of ways of developing as children and experiment and use imagination and stuff like that. So it seems to me that's, given what was said earlier in this meeting about the exponential increase in treatments for children and young people, has there been research done to identify an optimum age below which nobody should be kind of looking at treatment? Has that been done? Because clearly that would then, that could be translated into some kind of legislation to say that actually below a certain age, leave children be what they be, let them imagine, and there's no need for there to be any medical intervention. Has that been raised, and where's that got to?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems is that actually there hasn't been enough research, and that various researchers at a number of universities have said that they've been unable to do that research because they're being told that if you question it at all, then that's conversion therapy. And I think that's it's really problematic. And in other parts of the world now, particularly America and Canada, you have packaged, like pants for 3 and 4-year-olds. There doesn't seem to be any level at all. I think in this country we still do, but I know that there was the gender identity service, Tavistock in the UK. They sound like they're overwhelmed because the numbers are so huge. And again, it gets back to a safeguarding issue. Are they actually able to deal with that? And I'm not sure that they are. And when we are not able to talk about things, and a number of universities, I think Angelos and I sort of, both have experienced this, like directly. It's very difficult to talk about these things, and it's very difficult for researchers to actually to look at this because people don't want you to be talking about it.
I mean, the research that has been done, and the most useful research came out of Ken Zucker's clinic in Toronto, was it in Canada anyway, which ran for years and years and years with children who were brought to him as being gender confused or whatever. And he did what Transgender Trend now recommend and what many sane people would recommend, which is watchful waiting, because for the most part, most kids, if you don't start making a fuss and telling them that they actually are the opposite sex or whatever lunacy is going on, will over time, and particularly when they're allowed to go through puberty, will become absolutely fine with their sex. And I think on Zucker's thing it was something like 85% of children desisted, and most of those were in fact declared themselves lesbian or gay. And he was then, of course, shut down because the trans activists didn't like it. He was, literally, his clinic was shut down, and he's persona non grata. but he had published some really, really useful research. But this is what happens, you know, the useful research is then regarded as transphobic. And similarly with Lisa Lippman, who published about what is now called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which was an attempt to try and explain what has been happening with teenage girls, where friendship groups even turn up at gender clinics or just go to their school and say, we are all actually men and you must treat us as such. And these referrals have gone up exponentially. I mean, you know, I can't remember what it is, something quite ridiculous, like 4,000 times what it was, you know, and it's really mad. And she did the research with parents of some of these girls. Was that in Canada again? I can't remember. And she was allowed to have her paper actually publicised for about a day before the trans activists got everything closed down. But it's an interesting paper. It's a very beginning one, and it says, you know, lots more research is needed, but it's useful.
So we're running out of time here, so the last question, thank you. And then if you want to chat, if you want to... Oh, yes, I think I've said it.
I just wondered if there was anything that the people in this room can do when we wake up tomorrow that will make things better.
Yeah, get a conversation going. Find a way to open up the conversation. Even after tomorrow morning, was at this event last night, fucking brilliant. Where did you hear what's going on? Amongst your workmates, whatever. Even at the pub, just throw in a remark. Oh, did you hear about Meghan Murphy and Twitter? What? Oh, where'd you get a load of this? Get that conversation going, get the information out there, get people's brains working, and find that sort of segue into the conversation, just get it going.
I'm quite glad that question came up now, because I had just realised something really important hasn't been mentioned, and that is that your right to not believe this stuff and to say publicly that you don't believe this stuff is protected by Article 9 of the Human Rights Act. We do not we in this country, well, everywhere, that you have a human right not to believe anything. Well, you can to believe whatever you want and to not believe whatever you want and to say as much. Your right is protected, and people are forgetting this. So speak out, and if someone challenges you, say, I have the right of freedom of belief, and I do not have to subscribe to your faith. It is a faith, so remember, you can speak out, you have that fundamental human right, and you are protected by law.
Thank you so much for coming tonight, everyone.